All right, it looks like we are indeed recording. So welcome everybody to this Stress Mastery podcast and webinar. We're actually going to be broadcasting this information in a couple of different formats because, well, selfishly, I'm super passionate about this topic and I want everybody to be able to hear what we're talking about today with our very special guest, Dr. Luke Seaward, who I've gotten to know over the last couple of years. Actually, I really, really admire the work that he does. And it felt extra relevant right now because we're actually getting close to Stress Awareness Month, which is April. I know that sounds really crazy, but for me, when we get close to Stress Awareness Month, I get more stressed because I feel this sense of urgency to get this information out to people. And yet I'm really trying to teach and practice stress mastery, which, as you all know, requires healthy oscillation patterns, good rest and digest processes, and all that good stuff. So I know for me, this is really timely to just be reminded about how to set healthy boundaries, not just with technology, but with our energy in general. And also for our stress mastery professional trainees who are currently going through our program, this has been a topic that felt very relevant to us as well. So as we're learning this new content, wanting to get it out there to the world, there's just, again, that sense of urgency and commitment, which is a positive thing, the passion of all of it, but it can feel overwhelming at times too. So we want to take a chance to learn more from someone that I believe is not only an expert in what he's studied and what he's written about and the information he shares, but actually how he lives his life. So Dr. Brian, I will tell you that when I think of you, I really think of someone who's being the change in the world. And that is part of our motto with the Stress Mastery Professional Training is how do we show up as the change we want to see in our clients. And so I'm really, really excited to learn from you today. For those of you who are with us live, just a reminder that you can post questions in the Q&A box on your screen, or you can also post them in chat, which I'll be moderating. I also have a few questions that we gathered up from our professionals online beforehand, so I'll be able to facilitate those for us as well. So I'm going to actually turn my camera off and be a participant, and I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to you, Brian. And if you maybe just start with a little bit of information about your background. We'll certainly share your bio with everybody, but maybe some of the fun things about you and the work that you've done, just to give us some of that insight would be great.
Okay, great. Thanks. Well, thanks, Heidi. It's a real honor to be here, and a real pleasure to be part of this whole educational process. My background is as a health psychologist. I've been teaching this topic for, I can't believe I'm going to say, close to 4 decades. I don't feel like I'm that old, but it's a topic that of stress management is near and dear to my heart. Studied with several of the best people across the country for the number of decades. My background right now, for a number of years I taught in academia at the American University, and then for about 20 years here at the University of Northern Colorado, the topic of stress management. I teach some other things too in the area of health, but stress is my passion. I also wrote a textbook about almost 30 years ago, and it was a very progressive approach to stress management, and it's doing quite well. It's now in its 9th edition, so that's also what I do too. I love to write books, and so people at WellCOA, that stands for the Wellness Councils of America, asked me to do a couple of books for them too, and you'll see that this kind of dovetails into some of the content there, because my first book for them was on the topic of almost like a generic book on wellness, but my approach was mind, body, spirit. And then they said, would you do a sequel? And the sequel they wanted was on sleep. And I said, the real big topic right now is digital toxicity. So can we kind of add that to it? And they said, please go ahead and do that. So anyway, talking to Heidi, she said, let's call this topic on healthy boundaries, and I call it creating healthy boundaries. This topic is colossal. We could spend hours on this, and we don't have that kind of time. So just know that it's fathoms deep. And one thing I say when I teach stress management is everything I'm going to tell you, you've already heard before, because everything about this topic is common sense. But when people get stressed, Common sense is not too common. So therefore, review is a really good idea. So we're going to review some right now. So anyway, I have a couple slides just to share with you, a couple of simple concepts, and again, review here. I think it's kind of interesting, Heidi, that the topic of the day is starting on Ash Wednesday, which is definitely a healthy boundary for some people of a certain religious background. But when people make boundary decisions about their own behavior, it can fall in the category of New Year's resolutions. It could be things like religious things like today. But also I put up this picture of the big 5-0 because I noticed that when I turned 50 a little while ago, that people talk about their big O birthdays as being times of making behavioral changes. And I kind of thought, well, I guess better late than never. But anyway, just kind of let you know that it can be any time, the first day of the month, first day of the year, first day of Mardi Gras, or last day of Mardi Gras, I guess, you name it. So I have here, it says stress, new normal. And again, just kind of like be rhetorical here. It seems that stress really is the new normal. It doesn't have to be, but for a lot of people, it seems like it is. And I noticed that, like you, that the word stress and change are pretty synonymous. People don't like the word change. They don't like change they can't control. And we seem to have a lot of things going on right now that are in that category. Just a couple of things, again, just to review. But for example, we live in a 24/7 society. Your body can't be on 24/7. I know you know that, but just a nice reminder. We seem to be in an age of immediate gratification, especially with the digital world. People are also into voyeurism, looking to see what's going on with other people's lives. You can read the list. I won't go through the whole thing, but really what it comes down to is, my two favorite ones here are, you can't be on demand all the time. And that's what we're seeing. People are on demand all the time, which leads to really bad boundaries, really unhealthy boundaries. And ergo, the expression, creating healthy boundaries. I have been studying health now or a student in health for, I don't know, I guess my whole life, but this seems to be the biggest problem, is violation of healthy boundaries with things. And you'll see how it ties into stress and behavior. So we do live in a culture of distractions, no denying that. I heard this expression on Terry Gross's Fresh Air, and I thought, God, this would be a book title, A Culture of Distractions, because that's the world we live in right now. And I saw this graphic. It was in a Noetic Sciences magazine, and I thought to myself, this speaks volumes. Well, this picture's worth 1,000 words, that we lived in a plugged-in society. One of my favorite books, to go off topic for a second, is called Last Child in the Woods by Richard Louv. And one of my favorite lines in the book, for all the wrong reasons, is it's about kids who just don't get out in nature. And he came up with this term called nature deficit disorder. But he said that in interviewing kids, one kid said, well, why would I want to go outside? There's no outlets out there. So let's talk about behaviors. We're in the behavior business here. What are some basic behaviors? Eating is a behavior. Sleep is a behavior. Interactions with other human beings is a behavior. There are scores of behaviors. And when behaviors are helping us with our lives, then as a consequence, we think they're pretty good. When they're not helping, then we think they're negative, they need to be changed. So like smoking, as we all know, is not a good behavior, but people do it. Excess drinking, the list goes on and on and on. So you get the idea about that. So basically, healthy boundaries deal with behaviors is what it comes down to. And the list of behaviors could be everything from eating, sleeping, technology, finances is a big one, exercise, and of course, people as well. You probably heard the expression toxic relationships and things. So the really big question here is, how is your behavior? How are there certain things that you're doing that you'd like to make a correction to? And typically what we now know in terms of this is that behaviors are not easy to change. You may have heard the expression that says that it takes about 30 days to change a behavior. I think some of that may be related to some of the drug and alcohol rehab programs and how insurance companies kind of modeled that. So when behaviors do become second nature, then we don't have to pay attention to them so much. But the question is, how are your behaviors? And are there some behaviors that need some tweaking? Are there some behaviors that are less becoming of you being at your highest potential? This is really, I think, the most important question we can ask. And typically, whether we're honest with ourselves or not, I think we have to be very attuned to the fact that we don't live in a a world by ourselves. We come in contact with other people. And the minute you have a behavior which is less than becoming, it's going to affect other people as well. Your spouse, your kids, your colleagues and such. Take smoking, for example. So you get the idea about that. So this now comes to the question of, what's appropriate and what's inappropriate behaviors. And there's some judgment here about perhaps about what's appropriate, what's inappropriate, especially other people as opposed to ourselves. But the real question is about health. Is this behavior appropriate for good health? Does it distract from this, or does it detract from your own health and well-being? And again, correction factors, course correction factors, because if our lives seem like they're being derailed, we need to make some changes. And so that's where healthy boundaries come down to. Where do we first come across healthy boundaries? Probably from our parents. How many times were you told as a kid things like, take your elbows off the table, don't talk with food in your mouth? I mean, the list of behaviors is endless that we get from parents. One of my favorite ones was growing up was no phone calls at 9 o'clock. Of course, I grew up before cell phones, so we always want one phone in the house. But kids typically want to push the boundaries. And that's their job, they think, and they want freedom. Boundaries tend to seem as if they're limiting in terms of our ability to have freedom, but really boundaries are about being responsible. So you can't talk about healthy boundaries without talking about being responsible. And so now we enter into a value conflict, because the biggest value conflict I see in this country, maybe the world, is freedom versus responsibility. Freedom to do what you want, yet responsibility to yourself and to your colleagues, your family and such, so that everything's okay. When those two values come together and clash, then stress can happen. Not always, but sometimes. So think back to when you were a child and what boundaries your parents give. Or if you're a parent yourself, think what boundaries do you give your kids. And kids love to push the extent of boundaries. That's what they think their job is have complete freedom. And parents, if you have kids that do this, you're going to get walked over all the time. So now comes a question, as an adult, who makes the boundaries for you? And the answer is, you got to do it yourself. No one else is going to do it for you. You may get some kind of governmental suggestions or advertising suggestions with corporate media and stuff, but by and large, you have to decide for yourself what you want to do about your life. And this is a never-ending phenomenon. It's always going to happen where you do a self-appraisal, a self-assessment about how is your life going. And there's always room for improvement, I think. And that's the beauty, and sometimes that's the frustration with it all. So I'm going to be real simplistic here. And again, this is review. You should all know this. So just kind of review here. In simple terms, there are three kinds of behavior. There is passive, aggressive, and assertive. So let's just review for a second. Passive is where you are, in essence, and I'm going to be really kind of categorical here, you're getting walked over. People are just walking right over you. Aggressive, those are the people who are doing the walking over. Passive people have no boundaries. Aggressive people don't acknowledge boundaries, and they just barrel through. I told myself I behaved myself, Heidi, and I won't mention any names, but there's so many great examples in our world today of some world leaders who are in these categories. The one we want is assertive. Assertiveness is an example of having healthy boundaries, where you put up your perimeter and you say, this is my boundary, do not enter. And I'm going to ask you that you honor this. And so much of healthy boundaries comes down to assertiveness or assertive training. And yet in our culture, I don't see a whole lot of this going on. I don't see a whole lot, mostly because it's a lost art. It's a lost art. I won't even go into the dynamics of parenting and such today versus when I was being raised. But the consensus is that parenting is backsliding with all kinds of aspects. I just saw this video yesterday about the school teacher who was fired because she gave her kid an F because he did no work, and the parents came in and kind of like just chastised her and stuff. The point is that we live in a global society where I think parenting skills are perhaps not as good as they might be otherwise. But anyway, assertiveness is the idea. When I talk about healthy boundaries, I always bring up one of my favorite movies called The Color Purple. And I don't have, it's been a while since I've seen this, so I'm probably going to misquote this, but if you haven't seen this movie, I highly recommend it. I love this movie. But there's a one scene where Oprah Winfrey is on the back porch of her house talking to Whoopi Goldberg, and she says, "Girl, you're just a welcome mat, and people are walking all over you." And when I heard that, I thought to myself, this is lack of boundaries. When people are walking over you, you need to think passive behavior, no boundaries, and with that comes a problem called victimization. So, and a lot of people have seen the movie The Color Purple, or they've read the book. And so a lot of times when I give presentations, I try and pull in some cultural literacy there. And again, it's a great message. That's the one line from that movie that really struck home for me, being so important. So my question to you is, are you a welcome mat? Hopefully you're not. Nobody wants to get walked over, because when they do get walked over, it hurts. It's emotionally painful, and there's a sense of victimization. And victimization, we see a lot of in the world today. I have another name for it, but typically when you hear victimization being discussed, it comes out what I call as BMW. That stands for bitch, moan, and whine. And there's a lot of whining going on today. You may have noticed a lot of whining because of unmet expectations, but also people didn't expect to be walked over. And so we see this quite a bit. And what I typically say is, once a victim, twice a volunteer. If you get walked over repeatedly, then obviously you don't know how to put up good boundaries. And so very, very important to do. And we'll talk about how to do that in a second here. But victimization is a real big problem. And with victimization comes grieving. Again, we can go into all kinds of directions with all this stuff, which is, like I said, fathoms deep. I think you get the idea about this. But where there are lack of boundaries, you're going to see victimization. And it comes out with people bitch, moaning, and whining. Heidi and I do a lot of conversations about digital toxicity. I gotta be honest with you, and Heidi, I think, still can't believe this, but I don't have a cell phone. I marvel at those who do, but the reason why I don't have one is that I think it's very, very addictive. And not having one allows me to observe when I go to the airport, when I go to various functions and stuff, and see how people function with their technology. And first I want to say, excuse me, technology is not bad. I love technology. We're using technology right now. I love my Apple computer, but there's got to be limits with this stuff. And in terms of sharing here, I was raised by two abusive alcoholic parents, and so I know the addiction process pretty well from that perspective. And that's one reason why I chose not to have a cell phone. I thought, I needed to have healthy boundaries myself. But it is a problem. I think it's not going to go away. We definitely need technology here. It's got some good qualities to it and stuff. But the question is, are we appropriate with these behaviors? And I can tell you right now, a lot of people aren't. And it's a topic of conversation. So we call this digital toxicity. I just grabbed some pictures off the internet here, but again, I think people are very, very addicted to their technology there, and it's more problematic. We could spend hours on this topic in itself right there. A cartoon I thought I'd share with you. It says, "I am not your device, you are my device." If this hits home, you might want to consider having stronger boundaries with your technology. I think probably a lot of people can relate to that cartoon. I'm really concerned about things like video games too. But if you didn't get a chance to see this section of 60 Minutes with Anderson Cooper called Brain Hacking, I highly recommend it. Just so you're up on the ideas of why technology can be so addictive. Apparently, a lot of people have been working against your behalf to keep you glued with your eyes to the screen there. And again, just be aware of this stuff. And again, healthy boundaries is the answer. So I was asked to do this talk with Walcoa called A Good Night's Sleep. And I remember listening to the radio. I don't have a TV either. I kind of minimize that technology as well. But I do listen to the radio. I love NPR. I love all the NPR programs. And I listened to a story about what was called the invasion of technology in the bedroom. And it turns out that that in the past 20 years, things have gone kind of crazy with technology in the bedroom. A lot of people keep not only their television, which shouldn't be there, but all their computers, their iPads, their cell phones. They take out the alarm clocks and put them in cell phones. And what it's created basically is a biohazard. Again, we could spend a lot of time on this topic, but just know that the bedroom is meant for one thing and one thing only: Okay, possibly two, but technology is not one of them. And so what we now know, because I'm really concerned about the problem with sleep. I do a lot of talks on insomnia and stress, which in itself is another topic. But here's what we now know is that the blue light from the screen definitely affects the production of melatonin by the pineal gland. And this is definitely going to mess up your sleep cycle. And sleeping itself should be a behavior that we take a look at. But when you begin to see how these aspects of our lives merge, you can see how one behavior can affect another behavior and a detriment to our health and well-being. So one of the things they say is to maintain a media curfew. And people who do research on this is that you should have like 2 hours between when you turn off your computer and when you go to bed, just so you give your pineal gland a chance to make melatonin and have enough to have a good night's sleep. So if you get nothing else out of this talk, consider the idea of a media curfew, which means that have a healthy boundary with when you turn off all technology and have some downtime before you go to bed. I like that term, media curfew. And also they say designate your bedroom as a tech-free zone. Even the television doesn't belong in there. And a lot of people think that that's part of the furniture. No, again, I've been to a lot of seminars on sleep, and everyone closes with the same thing. They said the bedroom is for one thing and one thing only, sleep. So if you're looking to have a healthy boundary with your bedroom and your sleep patterns, remove the technology, have it be a tech-free zone. And this next thing I just thought I'd throw in here, and again, this is a topic of a conversation that we could spend a lot of time on too, but if you get nothing else out of this, it's this. Put your Wi-Fi router on a power strip and turn it off when you go to bed. You don't need your Wi-Fi router on when you're sleeping, but we now know through research done over in Europe and even some here that the what they call dirty electricity coming from the Wi-Fi router has a vibration that affects the production of melatonin in your pineal gland as well. So I've told this to people since I've been talking on the topic of sleep, and I said, turn off your Wi-Fi router, put it on a power strip and just turn it off when you go to bed, before you go to bed. And people said to me, since I've been doing that, I sleep much better. And I'm like, yeah, there's a reason for that. You can't talk about healthy boundaries without talking about this topic of work-life balance. And this is what we see and hear a lot of in corporate America. People searching for work-life balance, trying to get the sense of this. And back in the day, I'm going to say just 20 years ago to be kind of general about this, when people left work, they basically left the work behind and then went home. And they had a home life. But since technology is now so pervasive, people take their work home, and they also can take their home to work. But really what it comes down to is really poor boundaries. And as a consequence, you never get a chance to relax. You never get a chance to rest. And so think about this in terms of being always stressed. I mean, then we have a whole flood of stress hormones, and your body is on fight or flight, even at a small amount. This is not conducive for good health behavior. And so the work-life balance says you've got to have healthy boundaries with what you do for a living and the technology that's associated with that. So you're not tied. There's so many wonderful descriptions of things. They call this the electronic collar, the smartphone that you're always tied to work. So one question we come up with is, do you work to live or live to work? And a lot of people, I just met a guy the other day who was talking about trying to learn how to meditate. He said that he got out of the financial industry in Boston because he said all people did all day long was talk about what they're going to do on the weekends. They weren't even living their lives. They just basically were trying to get out of the doldrums of the finance culture they were in and having these fantasies of what they do on the weekend. But they said 9 times out of 10, the work came with them on the weekends. One thing when I teach healthy boundaries is, and if you like this idea, I'll try it here, as hard as it might be here. When I do workshops and seminars and lectures, I ask people they're sitting next to, get that person's phone number. And I said, if you know them, that's great. If you don't know them, even better, make a new friend. And then I say, now we're going to try to come up with an idea for a healthy boundary. Pick one area in your life that you'd like to pull the reins in, have some sense of control, because obviously with lack of boundaries, there's no control. And so the idea is that within a month's time, 30 days, we go by that drug and alcohol formula, 30 days to change your behavior. You call your friend, your new buddy, because this is now part of your support group. And we know that through all of the AA and all of these behavior modification programs, that when you've got friends who you can make yourself accountable to, you're more likely to not only adopt behavior, but make that behavior be part of who you are. So you can't talk about healthy boundaries without talking about support groups. And I just want to mention, we all know how important they are in terms of coping techniques for stress. But accountability is very important. And I don't know how many guys we have in the audience, but women are pretty good at support groups. Guys, not so much. So I'm going to give a homework assignment to every guy listening. Try and go out and find a new friend. Get one new person in your circle of friends support group, because as we get older, people kind of come in and come out. I've been living in Boulder now for 30 years, and I can tell you I've lost about a good 3 very close friends to cancer. So my support group has gotten smaller as people have died off, and my job is to make replacements. So this is also very, very important. And also what we do is, I feel it's important to share your boundaries with your friends and colleagues and family, because if you don't, they're not going to know what the hell's going on. But they're supportive to you. Say, hey, I'm there for you. That's a large part of the support group aspect. So healthy boundaries, appropriate behaviors, unhealthy boundaries, inappropriate behaviors. Pretty cut and dry. I think we all know this. What we typically say in terms of behavior modification is, don't change all your behaviors at once, all your negative behaviors. You'll pull your hair out. Pick one area in your life that you would like to come back to balance in. One area in your life you want to pull the reins in to have a better sense of empowerment or control, and work on that for 30 days. So I'm laughing, Heidi, because here we are in Lent, and I'm I guess a Reformed Catholic here. They always talk about giving something up, and although I just saw something today which I think is great. They said for all Catholics, give up single-use plastic. forget sugar, forget chocolate. Let's do something for the planet. Let's give up single use of plastic, which I think is a great idea. Now, Lent goes 40 days, I guess maybe because Catholics want to have extra 10 days. I don't know. But try 10 days, 30 days and see how that goes. And that's where we begin with healthy boundaries. Just a little metaphor. Every cell in your body has a cell membrane. Cell membrane is a protection so that things that don't belong inside stay outside, and things that belong inside stay inside. Some things can come in with permission through the receptor cells, but every cell has to have some wall of protection. And without that, all hell breaks loose. And so from the very simplest form of life, the single cell, we realize the importance of healthy boundaries. And I want you to think to yourself about this as well. Again, some flexibility, because even the cell membranes have flexibility, bringing things in and out and stuff. But without a form of protection, without a form of security, you have basically chaos. And when you see someone's life in chaos, and you pretty much think to yourself, yeah, no boundaries. Let me go back for a second here. So when you begin to come up with a boundary that you want to do in your life, and you think to yourself, okay, I'm going to do this. And you begin to tell your spouse, your kids, your colleagues, a lot of times they're going to basically say, I don't think so. I know you too well. You're not going to do this. If you're really good about trying to establish a healthy boundary, first, they're going to make fun of you. So I go back to this quote. I think it's from Gandhi. If it's not, I'm going to offer apologies up front. But he said, first they mock you, then they ignore you, and then they accept you. Your friends, your colleagues, your spouse, your kids, when you start making a new healthy boundary, they're going to make fun of you. Like, oh, you're not going to have sugar? Oh, come on. Oh, you can turn off your technology at 8 o'clock before you go to bed? I don't think so. They're going to make fun of you. Why are they making fun of you? Because they want to be like you, and they see ridicule as the means to do this. And then at some point, they're going to turn their back and walk away because they can't have an effect on you. And at some point, they're going to come back to you and say, what's your secret? I want to be like you. You seem to have some stability in your life now, and that's what I want. So know that when you make boundaries changes in your life, you're going to get some ridicule. You're going to get some people who they've been walking over you for a long time, and all of a sudden now they hit a boundary, and they're like, what is this? And they're going to make fun of you for it. it's possible. They're going to ridicule you. Or they may begin to say, wow, if I can't, have an effect on you, I'm going to go elsewhere and walk over somebody else, the ignoring part. But at some point, the ones who come back to accept you, they're the ones who you become a role model for, and we can share the light from within. I came across two things this past couple days about boundaries. I thought there's a message here. So I thought I'd share one with you. It says, the only people who get upset about you setting boundaries are the ones who benefit from having none. That's pretty significant. And then this also came across my Facebook feed too. Boundaries. If someone throws a fit because you set boundaries, it's more evidence that the boundary is needed. So again, if they begin to ridicule you, or I suppose ridicule could also be anger, that's because they can't walk over you anymore. Know you're doing the right thing. So how do you create healthy boundaries? Again, just to kind of refresh, pick an area in your life that you think you want to have a better sense of command over. I'll tell you right now, one of my ones is I give up Earl Grey tea for the Lent period. I love Earl Grey tea. I can live without it for sure. I've done that, but it's a nice test of willpower, and that's also important for healthy boundaries. But because of this idea of single-use plastic, I'm going to try that one out too. I love Planet Earth. I do a lot of work with the healing power of nature, so I think that I'm going to be an advocate for that one as well. So pick a boundary, pick an area, set a boundary around it. And any kind of activity requires practice. This is a skill. All stress management involves is skills. So you practice it. And you may decide that at first you're not good at it, but keep practicing. You know the proverbial joke about how do you get to Carnegie Hall? Practice, practice, practice. I've had lots of conversations with Heidi about this too. If technology has digital toxicity, I think mindfulness is the antidote. In one way, shape, or form, I think it's important just to unplug from the world and to catch your breath and just gain some sense of focus. And technology is great, but it's not the be-all, end-all. So mindfulness techniques and practice is very, very important. I do meditation every morning for about a half an hour, longer if I can. On the rare days I don't get it done, if I have a car appointment or a vet appointment or something like that, I end up getting a headache at about 3 o'clock. And I noticed that and I thought, didn't meditate today. Oh, by the way, I also got to tell you, I was involved in a study. One of my friends was doing a craniosacral therapy study, and he asked me to be a subject in a study. So I sat down, they had all these electrodes in my brain, in my head, I should say. And gal, the minute I got hooked up, she said, "Oh, you meditate, don't you?" And I said, "You can tell?" And she goes, "Oh, we can always tell the meditators." She goes, their rhythms are so much calmer. So again, I'm a real big fan of mindfulness meditation. There's hundreds of ways to do this, just so you know. But if digital toxicity is a poison, I am convinced that mindfulness and meditation is the antidote. So we began by saying with parents that when parents give kids boundaries, it feels like it's limiting. But I would like to turn the tables here and say that healthy boundaries are liberating, because when you have a sense of structure in your life, you feel free. And it sounds like an oxymoron, and I don't mean it to be, but really this is the idea that you are no longer a slave to other things, other people, such technology. You are a free person, and that's what really good stress management is about, is having a sense of freedom and liberation. Lots of books on boundaries. One here is called Boundaries, and it's by Henry Cloud and John Townsend. It's been out for a while. Lots of other books. I just thought I'd throw one up there for you. But know that this is a topic which is of great importance in the world today. I've written a couple books too. These are well-colored books. The first one I mentioned is called The Road to Wellness. Then the second one's called A Good Night's Sleep. A lot of good information there about digital toxicity and stress. And again, I'm going to tell you the most important thing I can remind you of is put your Wi-Fi modem on a power strip and turn it off before you go to bed at night. Heidi may mention to you too as well, but I teach a workshop, and I teach people how to teach stress management from a mind, body, spirit perspective. There's my textbook there. And I have a link that I think Heidi's going to put up with all this stuff here too. But if you have an interest in learning how to teach stress management from a mind, body, spirit perspective, a lot of people teach it from basically a biomedical model. And I found that doesn't work. There's a whole component of stress that involves the human spirit that if it's not addressed, we're kind of doing a half-assed job with it. So it's a 4-day workshop. I've been doing it for 20 years. We have over about, I think, close to 1,000 people who graduated from it. People say it's the best workshop they've taken. You get a lot of new friends. So if you have any interest in this, we'll have a link for you. And thanks for joining me on this webinar here. And thanks, Heidi, for inviting me. I really appreciate that.
Oh, so awesome. I am so grateful to you. And I love that you just showed the book, because I actually had mine ready to show everybody, but it's easier to see on the screen. And as you were talking, part of the reason that I turned my video off is because I knew I was going to be taking notes and things. But as you started talking about assertiveness training, I know for myself and so many in our community, that's really challenging. We have a lot of people who are so busy trying to take care of everyone else. We have some people who struggle with stress sensitivity and highly sensitive people where boundaries are really an issue. So I actually looked in the book and found a beautiful section on assertiveness skills training in the book. And I know our stress mastery professionals already are aware of the book, and many of them have it already. But for those of you who don't, I really want to encourage you to check this out, because it is just really a masterful organization of what we know around stress management. And one thing that Brian did not mention is not only is it in its 9th edition, but I know it's won some awards as well. And it also includes some digital content, some guided audios you can listen to, some interactive lectures. I mean, it's really, really incredible. And yes, we want everyone to check out his stress management workshop. We're going to add a link so that everybody can see that. And I know personally I really want to attend. So if it's not this time, it's going to be as soon as possible, because I love the blending of all of these different interventions. And Brian talks a lot in his book and his work as well about humor and spirituality and nature and a lot of the things that we love to discuss. So a couple things that we want to do before we close. Certainly want to invite those of you who are with us live to ask any questions that you have for Brian. And I did post a comment in there, and it probably just blended with some of my other thoughts, to be thinking about a boundary that you would like to work on and that you'd be willing to share with us for some extra accountability. I know that it's helpful as a presenter sometimes to hear what people are taking away and what they're actually going to practice differently. So I'd love to give Brian the gift of that from some of you who say, hey, I'm listening to this and here's what I'm willing to do differently in my own life. And I have one of those I'm going to share too before we conclude. So please go ahead. For those of you who are with me live, type those in the chat box. If you're watching the recording, you can post those in the comments section as well, and we'll make sure that he gets to see those. In the meantime, I have a couple of questions that I pulled from our Stress Mastery professional group ahead of time when we talked about this topic. And I think it's perfect that we start with Paula, who's actually here with us live as well. And she mentioned an experience she had recently where she was talking to somebody about the use of technology with children and babies. And I think there's two parts to this. I think the first one is, I guess, as educators, how do we best communicate the challenges around that? I actually just did an interview on that this morning around digital dementia and raising resilient kids. So we can both share a little bit about that. So really kind of like, what's the impact of this on our kids when they're getting constant access? And part two, which I think is just as important, is how do we advocate for that without being reactive ourselves? Because I think it's really easy, as you mentioned in the beginning, to be a little judgy about these things because we know how bad they are. So how do we communicate the importance without getting stressed out ourselves?
Yeah, good question. And full disclosure, I don't have any kids, so I probably just lost points on that one. But
well, I don't either. So we are experts on this topic. We'll tell you all what you should do.
My wife's grandson has, I think, a certain number of minutes per day that he can be on his technology. and they're very good about this. But they also say that he's got to spend time reading. He's got to spend time doing chores and stuff. And so again, that's basic parenting. We grew up with that. So again, it's not. They never tell him that technology is bad, but he's got to actually have healthy boundaries with that, take time with that, and then that time is up, and then he moves on to something else. I've noticed, again, not having this and watching people in restaurants and stuff, that I see a lot of parents bring their kids to restaurants, and then they'll be like, for an hour just looking at their device. And what this does to a kid, it gives the kid the message that that's more important than they are.
Right.
And so, yeah, we just got to be really careful with this, because kids are sponges. They pick this stuff up, and what's really happening right now is that you and I were born in a time when we knew life before technology, without smartphones.
Right.
These kids today, they don't know what life without this. So that's why, we don't judge. We just say, listen, here's what we suggest. Healthy boundaries, and every kid is like, I hate my parents. They won't let me do this. And then when you get to be a parent, it's like, wow. I'm doing the same thing.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, and Paula brings up a great point here as well, that, adults believe that the younger generation is going to keep tech alive, and it's just going to be part of their life. And I've certainly heard that a lot. It's like, why fight it? And I think we, again, as educators, we need to be careful with that, in knowing that we can't change anyone. So we don't want to get extra stressed about that. I know for me, the analogy I use is, I actually think that someday we'll look back on the overuse of technology the same way we look at smoking. So even when we watch movies and we see people smoking, and I remember being on an airplane and having a smoking section, it's like we look back on that now and think, how could we do that to ourselves with what we know? Well, we know a lot of that now, and yet it takes time, because of the addictive nature of technology, to make some of those changes. So I think what you're saying, Brian, and also kind of the thought of what I say is a digital diet. So not that technology is bad, but it's both the quantity and the quality. So yes, you can have a certain amount of time where you can use this great stimulating connecting device, but you also need to spend time in nature. You need to get physical exercise. You need to have social connection, and it's really a balance, all of that. So, and Paula, it really depends on the person you're talking to and what's going to connect with them. And I think, again, for those of us that get really passionate about this, we want to do it the best we can from a loving place and a supportive place. And you can kind of sense when people are open to it. And I think when they're not, we have to work on our ability to let go too. So I don't know, Brian, it seems like you have a very resilient personality, and you've made a lot of healthy choices around boundaries, especially with your potentially genetic predisposition with your parents and seeing struggles with addiction. Do you ever find yourself getting reactive or wound up, or maybe even things like what we call compassion fatigue, or things like that? Or do you feel and the consistency of that really helps you to respond more than react?
Yeah, I definitely respond. In a way, it's almost kind of comical to see like somebody with 3 devices in front of them, and I'm very compassionate. I think like, oh my God. But I don't pass judgment. I'm thinking like, wow, that person, obviously they're doing something very important. But I don't pass judgment. But I also think to myself, at some point, I really see we're going to turn around with this as a society. I've seen now there's headlines that say that people are switching from smartphones back to flip phones, so they can actually kind of like minimize some of this stuff here. So it's one big experiment. The problem is there's no control group. So I guess maybe I'm a control. I don't know. But it's...
You're an alien. I think you're an alien, a beautiful alien, and an example of what's possible, because I think what so many of us in our inner narrator is saying that in order to be successful, we have to do this. In order to stay up with the changing times, it's kind of like, well, this is where the world is going, so we have to adapt. And it's like, looking at what you do, you have a successful career, you're very productive with things, you're creative, and probably a lot of that is because of your ability to navigate this more effectively. I don't think we have a lot of great role models for that. And I think all of us who are here and committed to this have an opportunity to do that.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, very much so.
So let's see. I would like to ask, and again, I invite anyone who's here with us live to ask questions if you have some. We're starting to get some great comments about boundaries that people are going to set, so we'll share that next. But maybe before we do that, how do you use humor? One of my favorite topics. I know it's not necessarily boundary related, but are there certain techniques that maybe help you to oscillate, manage your energy more effectively, where you're bringing humor into the equation?
Well, yeah, I think that humor is essential in our day and age right now. Definitely takes the edge off some of the stress that people are experiencing, from headlines. I took a look at the new APA study they did on stress, and
Yeah.
this study was done with Holmes and Ray, headline stress. You take a look at the headlines and you get freaked out about that. So I look for the humor. I also try and separate myself from all this and just kind of step back and stuff. I live by the motto that says, try and find one funny thing a day. And when you do that, you end up finding lots of funny things a day.
That's right.
So that's part of that too. And of course, there's a lot of cartoons on digital technology and stuff. So
Yes,
I only used one. I could have used like about another 40 of them. It's amazing.
well, if you need more of those, I have a plethora that I can share. And most of you know, oh, how fun, from Dwayna. I was just going to mention, so Dwayna and myself and Sporty and some other people who are here are part of a group called the Association for Applied and Therapeutic Humor. And you can find out more information about that by going to aath.org. And I see here that Dwayna mentioned, who's also been very involved with that she met you at a humor conference at the Humor Project in New York years ago. And if you haven't yet spoken for AATH, we are going to drag you into that, because when I met Brian, he was speaking for the Art and Science of Health Promotion about humor. And it was so fun because I walked in and immediately he was talking about colleagues and friends of mine, Dr. Lee Burke and Gurder Baines. I'm like, hey, this guy needs to be part of our tribe. And then again, seeing that in the work that you do, I think is amazing. I think it's a great point what you bring up about being strategic about a humor practice. And what a lot of people don't realize is that when you look for things that are funny, even in the midst of difficult times, you start to train your brain to see more of that. Just like, unfortunately, we do the same with stress and negativity when we're constantly bombarded with those things. There's a lot of really great research around applying humor to building resilience. And I just kind of wanted to bring that up as well. So let's look at a few of these boundaries that people are committing to do. Paula actually mentioned that she's already been doing the Wi-Fi shutdown. My husband is or was on the webinar at one point, so I was kind of hoping he would pick that up and maybe help me with that one, because I'm not even sure where ours is, but I would like to try that myself. Let's see, we've got some other ones here. So Paula's new one is to break away from the computer at least an hour and a half before bedtime. Francesca, who is joining us from Costa Rica, who's also a stress mastered professional, says turning off the Wi-Fi at night. So she's already started turning off her phone. She's going to work on the Wi-Fi. But also in our stress mastery program, also said the Wi-Fi. So I'm sensing a theme here. I think you touched on something that many of us probably haven't thought of before. We think of our phones, but actually shutting down the whole Wi-Fi, I think sounds great. And what did I write down? So the Wi-Fi thing, but I think another one for me, and I'd be curious your thoughts on this, Brian, is also the frequency of checking. So I don't check in the morning. I have a very clear shut off time at night. I'm very careful about what I call my prime time, first thing in the morning and right before bed. But I still feel the pull to check and kind of the illusion that if I get one more thing done, then there will be less later. And like you mentioned, if I can tell based on how much I'm checking email, how much multitasking I'm doing, I actually start to hold my breath and I get headaches and I feel like I'm like allergic to technology, like I feel physically sick. So I'm just curious if you have created for yourself a pattern, and I'd open this up to anybody who's joining us live as well. Do you have any patterns around how to do that, or any guidance as to how to figure out what might work for us, knowing that we're all unique in how we respond?
Yeah, everyone's different. I know that one behavior suggestion is to try and just check things at the top of the hour, or like once an hour. The research is amazing, and I just got done reading an article of this guy who was trying to figure out how to get rid of his addiction. And the stats are like, I think people check their smartphones something like once every 2 or 3 minutes. And you have to ask yourself, how are you getting any work done? You know? So top of the hour, or the one article that says, is your smartphone making you dumb? But put it out of sight. I know some people who have their alerts on when every time they get a text or something like that. One person had I guess their cell phone lit up with a light. That's not having one. It to me is all kind of novel, but I just saw this thing kind of glowing. And I said, what is that?
I've seen that happen. It's so disruptive. Even for me, I'm like, this is like an alert response warning disaster situation.
Yeah, Pavlovian. I mean, Pavlov's dog. I'm sure he's having a good laugh on this right now. So so it's just, they say get it out of sight. Just don't have it in your field of vision so that you don't get distracted, because it can be very much so. But I like the idea at the top of the hour, just every hour, just check and see how things are going. And of course, you can feel like, oh my God, I got like 47 emails or texts. I wish I had checked them throughout the course of the time there. But the answer is, you're on a treadmill, and you have to step off the treadmill, otherwise, because you can't run all the time.
Yeah. That's great feedback. And I don't have the links or connections right now, but I will say to everybody, a good friend of mine, Amy Blankson, and I can type that in there, but she's actually the sister of a good friend of mine, Sean Acor, who wrote the book, The Happiness Advantage. And Amy has written about all of this, digital toxicity, and kind of she does a lot of speaking on some tips and techniques to navigate that. I think she's got some free downloads on her website. So I would encourage you guys to check that out. As Shauna mentioned, she watched a segment on this on the Today Show today, and the lady on there suggested putting a rubber band on your phone as you have to move it to scroll, and it's reminding you of what you're doing. I love that. What a great idea. What a fun technique. Thanks for sharing that, Shauna. I was also thinking one of my favorite things to do is to go on airplane mode. And so instead of thinking like, I'm going to not check, I put it on airplane mode, and there's just something that for me feels better about knowing that nothing's coming in, and that airplane mode actually works on the ground, which is super cool. So I think hopefully you all got some interesting tips and techniques. I wrote a ton of notes and many quotes and things. I'm going to actually write a little bit of an article about this, I think, for all of us, and will provide as many resources as I can with some of that assertiveness training. Also, just, I guess, maybe a little off topic, but I think it was really interesting. I was listening today to a lecture by Richie Davidson, who's done a lot of the neuroscience work with mindfulness and meditation, wrote a brilliant book called Altered Traits with Daniel Goleman, I believe was his co-author, about kind of the science behind mindfulness and meditation. But he was mentioning that there's recent research looking at the difference between empathy and compassion. And to me, this was a game changer, because I realized, as especially a sensitive person, when I'm experiencing empathy, I'm on other people's stress, versus compassion, where I'm really not taking on, I may see their suffering, but I'm not feeling it, I'm not embodying it, and I'm wanting better for them. I'm sharing loving kindness with them. And both compassion training and loving kindness meditation are beautiful techniques that we can actually practice to shape our brain in new ways. So for those of you who are watching, I think a lot of times those of us who are educators and healers and want to be helping people, very easy to fall into that kind of empathy trap. And even Paula mentioning, getting frustrated because someone didn't care as much about something that was really important. If we can train ourselves to shift to compassion and kind of loving kindness and letting go, I think that will be very helpful for us. And one more comment here. Katerina shares that she likes using standalone devices rather than apps. For example, using the heart math sensor rather than the app to measure heart rate variability using the phone's flashlight, which helps her to minimize the distractions that come with unlocking the phone. And I would totally agree with you. I think especially for those of us who may be more sensitive to the pull of that, super helpful to use things that are offline. And I would say similarly with like going outside and getting exercise and spending time in nature and spending time with people versus all of the kind of brain training technologies that are available. I think those potentially can be helpful when we need to measure something, but we want to move away from those as quickly as we can and into real world applications. So with that, Brian, thank you again so much for being here. I appreciate you so much. And we will share the great work that you're doing with everyone. We'll share the recording, and definitely we'll be inviting you to come back to talk with us again. And everyone who joined us, I want to thank you all for joining us as well. And we look forward to connecting with you again for the Stress Mastery webinar next month. Have a beautiful day or evening wherever you are, and good luck with setting those new healthy boundaries, everyone.
Yeah, don't forget to call your friends in a month and see how you're doing. If you want, just call up and say healthy boundaries and hang up.
That's right.
Thanks, Heidi. It's been a real pleasure. I look forward to doing this again sometime. I'll talk to you soon, okay?
Thank you. Thanks, everyone.
Bye, everybody. Here.